This morning I'm replacing this spring here on the trigger of my CZ452. It happens to be an HMR, but it's still the same whether it's a 2.2 or the HMR version. This pin is the one you remove to take the spring out and replace it. This pin here is the one you knock out if you want to put a tube in to take up some of the slack, some of the creep. And that pin there holds the sear in place. Later you'll see why it's important not to touch that. Fairly obvious when you see why, but for now I'm just going to concentrate on using the drift on that pin there so I can replace the spring. How the trigger works is quite simple. The spring acts as a resistance and it pushes up a pin up there. As you can see, the sear, which releases the firing pin in the bolt. As you pull the trigger back, that pin there operates the sear and moves it to fire the gun. There you go, somewhere a little bit closer for you to look at. As you can see the trigger moving back, you can see a bit of slack there we call creep, and then as it reaches the point where it touches the sear, lifts it away from the bolt and the firing pin's released, and that's how the gun works. Very basic, but a bit of simple mechanics. You need to understand that any creep there, that movement can be taken up, and how heavy, how hard or how stiff the trigger appears to be is from this spring here. There's a nut there you can adjust. If you turn it towards the spring, that increases the tension. Turn it towards the trigger blade, it reduces the tension. This is a sear. That's all the shape is. Spring in the end. Quite a small one, not very big. And that is the hole there where the pin goes through. So as it's held in place, the ball is resting in that spring, locates into a small hole in there. If you do knock that pin out, if you do need to remove the sear, you will find very quickly it will take a long time to get that back in place, trying to hold that ball in that spring and get it into the cup inside the action. To say it's a fiddly job is an understatement. There's just no room whatsoever. I do know how to do it. I've done it myself a few times and it's very long to explain. The thing to do is avoid taking that pin out. And as you can see from this trigger, the metal is not that strong. This side plate simply just snapped off. It's not that strong. In terms of it's brittle, so although it would take a bit of a wallop for it to fit over the action there, the plates, if you need to bend it one way or the other when you're knocking the pins in and out, it might flex it a bit. Be aware that too much movement on these plates could snap them, and it's a very expensive mistake to make trying to move these side plates. You can very easily break them. I'll just quickly show you how much space there is to turn on these nuts, on the adjusting nut. Not much thread, but it's a fair amount if you want to increase or decrease the tension on the spring that you've already got fitted. If you're thinking about adjusting your spring or putting another spring in, I should say, because it's too heavy or too light, it's worth just checking where that nut is and trying a bit of adjustment first. I'll just finish off by showing you one of these tubes. In the trigger kits you generally get 4 different ones, different wall thickness. The idea is, as I've shown, when the trigger's operated, it moves that way, and the pin that's fitted inside the trigger there between the two side plates, that acts as a lever on this sear here. The idea is you knock that pin out, put the tube so that the pin goes through it, have that tube in place, and it takes up some of the slack. I'm not doing that this morning. Simple reason being, what I want to try and do is find out just how much tension I want on that spring. I've tried the adjustment on the nut there, and I don't want to be thinking of two things in one go. If I'm thinking of the amount of creep that I've got, although I can work it out easily while I'm working on the gun, while out in the field I don't want to be thinking of how much creep there is. I want to concentrate on getting that spring just right, that tension just right. Once I'm happy with the spring, then it's just a case of taking that pin out after and putting the correct size spacer tube in, and the creep is either good or bad as you personally would feel. The spring, you just need to get used to it and actually fire it quite a few times before you get an idea if you like the tension or not. So this morning I'm leaving the tube alone, the creep as it is. Quite a bit of movement there, but I'm happy enough with it. I want to get this spring done. There's quite a few different kits on the market. The simplest of them is this Eric Brooks. It's just a simple 4-spring, 4-tube design. You just choose the spring that you want. Inside on the card there's instructions on how much creep can be removed by the tubes, the wall thickness and the poundage of the spring, so you can choose from the very lightest, it varies up to the heaviest, but the heaviest spring in there gives a lighter tension than a CZ factory spring.